Julia, if you are ready, you may.
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready. So, hi everyone. Thanks for coming to my presentation. My name is Julia Jones, and today I will be talking about my project for the GIST program. And specifically, I will be talking about a method for modeling the change in distribution of an endangered lichen species under projected climate conditions. And the goal of my project was to visualize possible impact of climate change on the dune hair lichens range over time. Globally, climate change has led to shifts in climate zones, resulting in spatial and temporal changes in species distribution and abundance. So modeling the spatiotemporal impact of climate change can be used to develop conservation strategies for a species and their habitat. The presentation, I'll go over the dune hair lichen, their species habitat, the study area, the data sources I used, the study design, results and discussion, and then conclusions. So just a little about the dune hair lichen. It's a rare species that's listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. The population size is decreasing, which is part of the reason why it's on that list. It has an estimated population of 2,500 mature individuals. Although it's not substrate specific, it's found mostly on conifer trees, and it's dispersed by gravity, wind, and animals, which is an important factor when thinking about the range of a species. So the species habitat and the study area. The species is found in hypermaritime dune forests along the Pacific coast in North America, but specifically the United States, California, Oregon, and Washington. The study area includes states where the dune hair lichen was observed. So I used the shapefiles from the census.gov of California, Oregon, and Washington. Coastal dune forests are sensitive to climate change, especially precipitation timing, drought, flooding, wildfires, and coastal erosion. So predictive species distribution models require point locations showing where the species has been known to occur, and also bioclimatic variables that provide information about climate factors that are known to have a significant impact on biota. And my species occurrence points were taken from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. It's an international network of entities who contribute to free and open access infrastructure or database of biodiversity data. GBIF had 87 observation and preserved specimen records for the dune hair lichen from 9 different data sources between 1974 and 2020. However, only points that included coordinates and only ones that included coordinates were used in this study. So that narrowed it down to 23 individual locations and over the same time period, so 1974 to 2020. Species occurrence points plotted here show distribution along the coast with the highest density in Northern California. And the range is fragmented, but the spatial clustering, it could be an indication of sampling bias. However, the species occurrence points will still allow the model to determine correlations between these points and climate variables. The climate data was acquired from WorldClim, which uses bioclimatic predictors developed by USGS. to identify and define climate conditions that are related to the physiology of biota, and so therefore are very indicative of their survival. The bioclimatic variables were developed as continuous raster surfaces from the PRISM climate mapping system. The variables capture annual and seasonal changes in temperature and precipitation. And in total, there are 19 bioclimatic variables that have been adapted by WorldClim and used to provide raster data sets for historical and future climate conditions. In my project, a resolution of 2.5 minutes was used. You'll see they have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and 30 seconds. And 2.5 was chosen just based on the area of occurrence. For the future climate data from version 2 of WorldClim was produced by downscaling data from CMIP6. CMIP's objective is to better understand past, present, and future climate changes arising from natural unforced variability or in response to changes in radiative forcing in a multi-model context. WorldClim utilizes simulation data processed or produced by downscaling a selection of 23 of those global climate models, or GCMs, from CMIP6. This project used 5 of the 23 GMCs, mostly because computing power limitations there, and evaluated climate change projections over 4 time intervals. Also, that was kind of a joke, but also mostly the literature stated that it's more important to have climate models that are made or that perform well in your given region. So I chose ones that performed well in my region. So the study design. The study, it started by using species occurrence points and historical bioclimatic variables to build a predictive model using what's called the presence only prediction or Maxent spatial statistics tool in ArcGIS Pro. Then I used the nearest neighbor distance, or the minimum nearest neighbor distance, as a dependent variable in the study, because the Maxent tool uses the NND, or nearest neighbor distance, parameter value to apply a spatial thinning to the model. It's a method to correct the spatial clustering that can happen from sampling bias. That's kind of pretty prone when you're using species occurrence points only or presence only. The distances were chosen in 10-kilometer increments from 1 to 100 kilometers, and model diagnostics were compared for each model to identify which NND value produced the best fit as determined by the area under the curve of the ROC plot, which I'll get into, and the omission rate. The model was then rerun using the NND that was chosen in the previous step. In this case, it was 100 kilometers, but I'll get to that. Species occurrence points, future bioclimatic variables, and those were all used to build the predictive model for each of the 5 GCMs. And then from there, I built an ensemble model from the averaging of those 5 GCMs. And then finally, I used the difference in raster values between the current predictive model and the ensemble model for change detection analysis. Results and discussion. So the best nearest neighbor distance, the nearest neighbor distance was changed to find the value that produced the best fitting model as determined by the area under the curve, or the AUC. of the ROC plot and the omission rate. Models with AUCs closest to 1 and omission rates closest to 0 are most favorable as a general rule. Here we can see the NND, which is the NND, yeah, of 100 had the best AUC and omission rate. Okay, so with an NND of 100, the model propagated a total of 85 points throughout the study area, as shown on the map. Ones in gray are background points, and then the like light greenish blue turquoise colors, the background classified as potential presence, and then the blue is presence correctly classified. And there were a total of 8 potential presence points, 4 of which were correctly classified. However, it is important to point out that all of it correctly classified all of the known points. Like all of the known points it had classified as presence, which was impressive. Especially there was a point that was a little bit outside, further inland, like kind of near Fresno. And it's in an area that you wouldn't have really thought to find it. And so all the other models missed that point, but this one actually accurately or correctly classified it. So I was impressed by that. On the next slide, I have it highlighted there in red. All right, so this map shows the training model prediction. That was an outcome of running all of that. Darker values correspond with higher probability of presence. Not surprisingly, the raster shows a higher probability of presence along the coasts. However, it also shows high probability in southeastern California, especially along the Colorado River. And although the model detects suitable habitat there, it may not be realistic to expect the presence of dune hair lichen in those areas, just given limitations of like the dispersal agents and maybe the absence of potential substrates like the conifer trees that it's mostly found on. So that's something to keep in mind. These maps show the predicted spatial change in species presence between 2021 and 2100. Darker values correspond to higher probabilities of presence. The classification is split into 4 classes with predictions values between 0 and 1. Most notably, the areas of predicted presence increase over time, and they also shift inland and up along the coast. Given that the dune hair lichen is endemic to the coastal dune forests, it's really uncertain how well they'd be able to adapt and survive outside of locations or in locations outside of the coastal dune forests. So that's something to consider. These maps show the spatial change in suitability from the present to each time period. Negative values indicate areas where the probability presence decreased compared to current conditions. And then also the positive values indicate an increase. And in these ones, negative values are the lighter, and then positive is darker. The study area included locations where presence may not be feasible for the species. So in order to kind of keep that in mind, I I took locations that were closest to points of presence, either potential presence or correctly classified presence for each model time period. And those are shown in the squares and the triangles. And also, the maps include the locations and abundance of those predicted presence points as graduated symbols. So each symbology is a representation of its relative abundance in that location. To better understand the change in suitability at points of predicted presence, I also created these charts showing the raster values at each point. It is notable that over time, there were no negative raster values at the points of predicted presence, but the mean raster value was, hovered generally, between 0.22 and 0.36. So kind of, a little lower, but not super duper low. But yeah, so my conclusions. The study or my project really is just kind of the beginning of what's possible for this kind of study. Predictive modeling is an iterative process. So updated information should be routinely incorporated into the model to build a more accurate representation over time. The models get smarter as time goes on and as it learns more information. It's an essential part of machine learning. The model in this study could benefit from investigations in areas of potential presence to confirm presence or absence, because the model would benefit from an increase in presence points overall. Unfortunately, because it's a rare and endangered species, there weren't a lot of occurrence of points to begin with, and I think it would really benefit from a really systematic mapping of these species. And this, the findings here could really help managers strategically figure out where they should be looking. It could limit the sampling bias that was shown. Just because it seems like there's a human sort of bias to where these have been, or possibly a human bias to where these have been collected before. Who knows, based on, accessibility issues, like those can be limiting factors when you're gathering point data. So using this study to say, hey, this species might occur in an area that we didn't think that it might have before. It's a way of going into those places that are lacking these points based on bias to get that data, and thereby kind of limiting the spatial clustering as well. Lastly, the study only considered the relationships between bioclimatic variables and species presence, but there are a lot of other factors that go into why we're seeing a species in a location that go beyond those variables. According to the IUCN, the dune hair lichen is also threatened by residential and commercial development, recreational activities, and pollution. So these additional threats should be included in future model assessments to create a more holistic view of the species vulnerability. Future models should also include the species range of possible substrates such as conifers, and also the range of dispersal agents, the biological ones at least. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions?